on higher education, which one is the one? But we'll leave that a mystery for now. Well, it is great to be here. It's just a delight and a privilege to be able to share a few thoughts that I've had over several years, as I'll tell you. We've recently moved here, as Jeremy mentioned. I'm married to my beautiful wife. We have 3 children. They're a lot of fun. One of my students is here, and they get to hear all of the tales of what it's like to raise children as a moral theologian. The moral there is to be taken in terms of the subject that I teach, not how I always act as a father, although I wish I were perfect. And so that's what I do, actually, is I live life and I raise children, and I try to love my children and my wife. And I teach at the Augustine Institute. I teach moral theology, all those things related to life in Christ, what it means to live out the Catholic faith, what it means to do that as an individual and families and society. So as you can imagine, talking about all of these social issues, issues of morality, I tend to get the easy, really boring, non-controversial questions. So I get to have a lot of fun dealing with those. That was a joke. You have to imagine the sorts of questions that I might get asked. In any event, so I am a professor, so I have to have a long title for these thoughts that I want to share with you. And the title that I came up with is On Being a Consummate Professional, or Wisdom in the Workplace. Okay, so these are a kind of constellation of thoughts, and this is the perfect place to share them, because when I thought about, well, what is it that brings us all together here? And it's that we all have a profession, right? And what is that profession? Well, it's, I believe in one God, Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth. That is our profession, right? We have that in common. And when we say to ourselves, well, what does it mean to be a professional? It means to be someone who has a profession, someone who makes a profession. And so one of the things that we profess is our faith. On the other hand, we also have a profession in the sense that we probably mean when we talk about the young Catholic professionals, and that is when we profess a certain occupation, when we profess that we are skilled or competent in a certain line of work. And so the question that I have been thinking about and that I'd like to share with you is, how do we bring those 2 professions together? And my suggestion is, if we can bring those 2 professions together, that profession of faith and the profession of occupation, that is what amounts to being a consummate professional. Now, this line of thought has been with me for a little while, and I have to start back at the very beginning. So I am a California native. I was born and raised in California, mostly Southern California. There's a little complexity there that I'll spare you. But so I grew up there. I went to UC Berkeley, and I studied music there. And that was actually the culmination of something that started long before that. When I was 3 years old, I started playing the piano. And I can remember pretty distinctly sitting on a piano bench. My feet couldn't even reach the floor. And I was trying to play piano. It was not always easy. My hands were very small. And so I can also remember moments of breaking down crying, and my mom would come over and comfort me and say, just try it, 5, 10 more times, and you'll get it. So I'd do that, and I'd be encouraged, and it would work. And so early on, I started playing classical piano. I was playing at recitals and doing different competitive things. And I think this is where I began, obviously in a kind of implicit way, to think about the pursuit of excellence as a musician. There's a lot of practice, there's a lot of refinement, there's a lot of repetition that goes into learning a musical instrument. How many musicians do we have out there? Hands up high? Okay. Good number. You know what I'm talking about. It's rewarding in the end, but there's a lot of work that goes into the pursuit of excellence, the pursuit of excellent musicianship. So that's where I began to have this sense of pursuing excellence. So I carried that with me, and I went to UC Berkeley. I started studying music, and I was surrounded by other people who were in love with their craft, who were working on pursuing excellence in music. I was aiming at being a composer, I wanted to compose for film, so I wanted to be a film composer, and this didn't end up working out. And the reason for that is because over the course of my first couple of years at this university, I fell away from my faith, mostly out of moral laziness. I had some intellectual questions as well. And it was not until my third year where I had a pretty profound conversion experience, and I came back to the faith and began to appreciate what a great good it was. And I thought, people need to know about this. And so that's when I signed up with Net Ministries. I traveled all over the United States, doing retreats 6 days a week with young people, teenagers across the country. We were 11 of us on our team. We lived with host families, but we like to say we lived in a van. It was very intense. And we did this great work. And that was an amazing period of formation and discovery for me as I was sharing the faith, falling in love with the faith. And then when I finished that year, I came back to UC Berkeley for my final year, and I found myself wondering, what does it mean to live out my faith while I'm at college, while I'm studying? And my first thought was, I get to share the faith. UC Berkeley was not a place that was super friendly to Christianity, so I thought, yes, this is the battlefield. Here we go. And I came back, and I thought, this is what it means to live out my faith. And I did try to do that, but then I found myself wondering, well, what does it mean to live out my faith as a musician? So you see, the thought process is going a little deeper as I'm spending some time there. What does it mean to live out my faith as a musician? And I realized, I can write a religious piece of music. And so my senior project was a Latin Mass for chorus, and that was a beautiful experience. I had an advisor who would like to kind of probe and poke me about my faith, and it gave me a chance to explain some of the things that I believe. And so that was one way I figured out, okay, I can sort of live this out by writing a religious piece of music. And then I went still deeper and I thought, well, what does it mean if I'm working on another project that's not explicitly religious? What does it mean to be a Catholic trying to live out my faith in the studies that I have or in the work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis? How can these be related? And this takes us back to my opening point about being a professional. This was basically the question of how do I join and link the profession of faith with the profession of a certain occupation, an occupational profession. So after this conversion experience, I had a period of discernment where I was praying about, well, do I continue with music, which I really love and I continue to love to this day, or do I find a way to share the good news about Christ with others in some other way? And for me, that way, because of a kind of intellectual journey I had had into the faith, was studying theology. And so I went out to Europe and I studied and taught theology for several years out there. And that was when I began to discover how the church thinks about human work, how it thinks about what it means to be a professional, how the church thinks about the world of work. And that was when I began to understand more and to try to live out more what it means to join or link the profession of faith with the profession of work or a professional occupation. Okay, and so when I think about this, I'm a professor, so I have to use a text. And this is a text that I share with my students, and I just want to highlight for you a couple of moments. This is a text from Vatican II. One of the documents of Vatican II is called a Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, otherwise known as Gaudium et Spes, Joy and Hope. And this document runs through a number of beautiful topics. And one really beautiful moment in there for me as a lay professional comes up in paragraph 43. And the document begins by talking about this split between, as it says, the faith which many profess and their daily lives. And it says that this split deserves to be counted among the more serious errors of our age. So this is a kind of disjunction between faith and daily life, or in our context here, work, right? A professional occupation. So, this is a big problem. What do we do about it? What is the solution to this problem? How can we join this? And this really aligned with the kind of thinking and quest that I was going through to bring these together. And here's what we read a few lines later. Christians should rejoice that following the example of Christ, who worked as an artisan, they are free to give proper exercise to all their earthly activities and to their humane, domestic, professional, social, and technical enterprises by gathering them into one vital synthesis with religious values, under whose supreme direction all things are harmonized unto God's glory. That's a long sentence. The main point of it is that Christians are called to work, to live their daily lives, and bring that into a synthesis with their faith, to unite that. How do we do that? It goes on later to say the solution is what it calls Christian wisdom. Okay, one last little passage from here. Bringing this together, it says, enlightened by Christian wisdom and giving close attention to the teaching authority of the church, let the lay person take on his or her own distinctive role. So through the enlightenment of Christian wisdom, paying close attention to the church and her teaching, let the lay person take on a distinctive role. So what is that distinctive role? Well, the way I share this with my students in the classroom is that role is twofold. One is the evangelization and sanctification of the world. This is proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. And the other is the renewal of the temporal order. Now, between those two, we think sometimes, well, to be a Christian, to be a Catholic in the workplace is to share Christ with others. And that is true. And that is certainly our task, and certainly part of our mission. But the other part has to do with this idea of renewing the temporal order. What is the temporal order? All the things that we do in everyday life. The work that we do, the culture that we appreciate and try to build up, the social interactions we have, political institutions and legal arrangements, all of these things enter into the temporal order. And we, as Christian lay people, as Christian lay professionals, this is the realm in which we live. And in order to live in that realm, we need to have Christian wisdom. So, what is Christian wisdom? There's a lot that goes into this, but a way that I think we can kind of encapsulate the idea is like this. Christian wisdom is being able to see the world and our lives from God's perspective, and thus be able also to judge and act accordingly. So Christian wisdom is seeing the big picture from God's perspective, how all things are ordered in God's providence to his glory, and being able to judge particular situations and then act in accord with those judgments. Christian wisdom is what allows us to bring together these two dimensions of our faith and our work. We need to have this vantage point because of the nature of the work that we do in the secular world. It's our task as lay faithful, as lay professionals, to be out in the secular world, to be doing the work that we do, but to do it in a way that reflects our deepest convictions about the faith, our deepest convictions about the true, the good, the beautiful. And through Christian wisdom, we are enabled to dive into our work, dive into the workplace, a particular situation, to discern the good of the moment that's in accord with God's plan, and to act to achieve that, to realize it. Now, to develop this, Pope St. John Paul II talked about the idea of an integrated formation. What does it take to develop this vantage point of Christian wisdom, to be able to dive into our work, to see the truth, to pursue the good, to act accordingly? it takes an integrated formation. That involves the intellectual side, the moral side, and the technical professional side. So we can think of this as it requires the mind, it requires the heart, and it requires our hands, the work that we do with our hands. So the intellectual side is especially catechesis. What does the faith teach about what it means to be a human being? What does the faith teach about who God is and our relationship to Him? How can we reflect on that in order to bring that into our lives in a concrete way in the workplace, in our family lives? Okay, this intellectual formation is key. The formation of the heart, the moral formation, has to do with the cultivation of the virtues. Knowing the church's moral teaching, but internalizing that. Being able to see the good, to do the good, to desire the good, to have this interior peace and harmony which allows us to realize the good in our lives and realize the good for others. So we have this moral formation, the formation of the heart. And then the third category is technical or professional excellence. This formation of the hands. Part of our job as Catholics and Christians in the workplace is to do our work and to do it really, really well. The pursuit of excellence, which is where I began my own story, that is critical to the work that we do as Christians. We should be working with excellence and with great love. And it's our love that leads us to pursue excellence. Love for the work itself, love for those whom our work touches, love for those in the workplace who rely upon us to do good work. So technical excellence is the third component. And it's bringing these three components together that allow us to live out Christian wisdom in the workplace. When we have the mind in harmony with the heart, working through the hands, we have Christian wisdom at work. There's one particular obstacle that I want to mention. There are lots of obstacles out there to enacting this and to realizing this. But one that I think comes up more and more, and there's a whole kind of burgeoning literature around this, is the obstacle of distractions in the workplace. We all experience it because of lots of different factors, primary among which might be technology and media. So how do we deal with distraction in the workplace, and what's at root there? T.S. Eliot had this great phrase in a poem, The Four Quartets, and this was a while ago, but it applies now. What's the difficulty? Well, today we are distracted from distraction by distraction. So how do we bring our lives back into a kind of harmony and unified focus? We have to overcome a certain vice that's within us. And this vice doesn't get named very often, and it would be really great to just talk at length about it, but I only want to throw out there one of the capital vices. We have the 7 deadly sins, and we think of them as being these really big things. One of them is the sin of sloth, and sloth has to do with the sluggishness of heart. That's what we talk about sloth. That's what we think of firstly. But at root with sloth is a refusal to accept the greatness of our call. And so we kind of just despair, and we're kind of immobilized. But what can happen is that we mask that over by hyperactivity. We quickly run into this so that we feel like we're getting something done, but we're not really realizing the greatness of our call. We quickly move over here and check this so that we feel like we're doing something, we're being productive, we're in touch with other people, but we're not really doing the task at hand or what we're called to. And it's doing the task at hand that allows us to realize the greatness of our call in the workplace, which is situated within the greatness of our call as sons and daughters of God. Capital vice of sloth, of overcoming distraction, part of that is cultivating this intellectual formation of the mind, formation of the heart, and the technical formation to know what to do with distractions when we find them. And I'm going to come back to that towards the end. But when we put those all together, we get a package that is not only Christian in character, characterized by Christian wisdom, we get something that is rare and valuable in the workplace. It's a professional benefit to cultivate Christian wisdom and to bring it into the workplace. So, cultivating Christian wisdom, bringing into the workplace, unifying the profession of faith and our professional occupation. I want to give a couple of takeaways as we think about how to realize this in our lives. The first one is simply an affirmation, and that is the work that we are doing is very important in the church's mind. The secular work that we do in the secular world is critically important. Whatever the work might be, when it's done with great excellence and great love, it is a noble work and a noble task that we are fulfilling. This work is, in large part, our way to sanctification. So we need to love it. We need to treat it with respect. We need to do it well. So that's the affirmation. And then a challenge is to cultivate Christian wisdom. Okay, that's easy enough. No, it's not easy. Let me give a couple of practical, down-to-earth ways that we can cultivate that. These are a couple of things I've tried, and I think I found them helpful, and I hope you might too. So I'm going to start with the hands, the technical, professional side of things. And I want to suggest what I think of as a professional examination of conscience. Lent is coming up. It's a great time. I try to do this once or twice a year, where instead of examining my soul for sins before going to confession, although these things can be tied up with sins, I examine my work life for faithfulness to God's call. I examine it for distractions, for overcommitments. I think I was just telling my class today, my desk is a sign of how I'm doing with this. If my desk is exploding, not going so well. It's time for a professional examination of conscience. So it has to do with focusing on the one thing or the set of things that will enable us to flourish in the workplace. It will enable us to realize God's call for our life. So it's assessing what we're doing, how we spend our time. Sometimes this gets called workflow management. How are we doing as stewards of our time, as stewards of the talents and skills that we have in the workplace? This is about keeping our focus, honing our diligence. This leads to skills that are highly marketable, highly valuable. So there's a payoff there. Okay, so a professional examination of conscience to refine and hone our hands. As for the heart and our moral formation, this is nothing new, but daily prayer is simply a must. However short it might be, ideally building up, the saints in the church come out unanimously that there is no salvation apart from prayer. There is no Christian wisdom or Christian work apart from prayer. So daily prayer really is a must. It allows us to keep the most important things in view, to keep the highest things in view, and it's having that view that allows us to look with wisdom, to judge with wisdom, and to act wisely as well. In addition to that, one moment at least of recollection at work. It can be a few seconds where we lift our minds and our hearts to God in the midst of our work. There doesn't have to even be an externalized vocal word, though there can be. Maybe praying the Angelus is a way of doing this, at noon or something. And so being able to raise our minds to God, to put ourselves in that state of keeping the long view, keeping our eternal destiny in view, and ordering everything in our lives and workplace according to that. When we have this moral formation of the heart, and we're loving well and working well, it helps us also to cultivate relationships, and relationships are critical to success in the workplace. The last element is the formation of the mind, intellectual formation. For this, it's simply a suggestion to have continuing intellectual formation or catechesis worked into your schedule. I don't mean your schedule at work, though if you can, that's great. I just mean we schedule the important things in our lives, and having a continuing intellectual formation broadens our viewpoint. It broadens our viewpoint to see the whole, to see our work within a larger perspective of life, of God's vision for our lives in the world. And it's that broader perspective that, again, allows us to see and act with wisdom. These can be things like church documents, reading them, right? Things like solid Catholic books or other great books. It can be poetry, great literature. These form us and shape our minds, and having a well-shaped broadened mind is key to formulating vision. And vision is, again, something that brings real value and makes a contribution in the workplace. So again, we have the formation of the hands, these technical skills, which leads to the increase in skills, which is a great benefit in the workplace. We have the formation of the heart, daily prayer, one lifting of the mind to God at work. Having love residing in our hearts allows us to form relationships. And relationships are a great benefit in the workplace. And finally, continuing intellectual formation. Reading good books. Scheduling that into our lives. That is a great advantage because it gives us a viewpoint to have vision in the workplace and for our lives as a whole. We have some great saints that model these points. They're a little hard to find sometimes. I'm not going to run through them, but I want to throw out a couple of names. The reason they're hard to find is because we have a lot of saints who are religious, who are priests, and they are amazing to read. They're amazing to love. They're great saints with whom to walk. But it's less common to find a lay saint who's actually working. Okay, so think about saints we've had recently. Saint Cyril and Methodius, great evangelizers, right? Saint Maximilian Kolbe, a martyr for the faith. Saint Valentine, most recently, right? Designer of cute hearts with sweet nothings written on them. Saint Valentine was a martyr, too. We don't know too much about him. But there are other saints like Saints Louis and Célie Martin, the parents of Saint Therese of Lisieux. They were very able, very prudent, very talented workers. So much so that some people criticize Saint Therese for having such a privileged upbringing because her family had so much money. Well, they were working well. They were stewards of that money. They were generous with it. They're great examples. I recently talked about Venerable Jan Tyranowski with my class. He was a very influential person in St. John Paul II's life. He did great work as a tailor and sharing the faith in these different groups. He reformed others and they went out and formed people. We have recent models like Francois Michelin, who designed the tires that we call Michelin tires. Catholic figure, very well read. When he is interviewed, he's citing things like Marx and Hegel and all these different philosophers, and he has this amazing vision that allowed him to cultivate and grow a very, very successful tire business. There are all sorts of figures out there, canonized saints, venerables, recently deceased Catholic businessmen, and keeping them in view is really helpful. I want to close with one saint from the Augustine Institute, very dear to us, St. Augustine. I brought a few little gifts, and they're on the table over there. A bookmark, and that is to help you with your intellectual formation, and a prayer card, which is to help us with our moral formation. They look like these over there. So from us at the Augustine Institute for you. And St. Augustine is a great role model here. In both of these, we have images of St. Augustine handing over his heart to the Lord. As we know, St. Augustine was a bishop, a prolific writer, a great theologian, but he began as someone who did rhetoric. He was highly trained, highly skilled in logic, the arts, the art of rhetoric, and his journey was in part bringing together that highly skilled work that he did and putting it in the service of the Lord, on, as it were, becoming the consummate professional, bringing together that professional competence, that professional occupation with his profession of faith. And so he can be an intercessor for us as well as we strive to bring unity to our lives through Christian wisdom, unity to our work, and in that, offering it to God. And so I'd love to just close with the prayer on the back of this prayer card, because it mentions our work. And my intention is just that we can all become wise workers, that we can all become consummate professionals. So let's close in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Breathe in me, O Holy Spirit, that my thoughts may all be holy. Act in me, O Holy Spirit, that my work, too, may be holy. Draw my heart, O Holy Spirit, that I love but what is holy. Strengthen me, O Holy Spirit, to defend all that is holy. Guard me then, O Holy Spirit, that I always may be holy. Amen. Father, and the Son, and the Spirit. Thank you very much. Thank you.